Elias Andrade woke up before sunrise, as he had done every day for years. The dim light of dawn filtered through the worn-out curtains, revealing dust particles dancing in the still air of the small apartment. The ticking of the old wall clock was the only sound filling the room, except for the occasional muffled creak of the pipes. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Elias ran his hands through his disheveled hair and took a deep breath. He followed a routine religiously, not out of desire, but inertia. Coffee was always made at the same time, strong and bitter. The bread, always dry, without butter. He turned on the radio just for company, but modern songs sounded like distant, empty noises. Nothing touched him anymore. At 42, Elias carried on his face the marks of a life not fully lived. A frustrated musician, he had abandoned the stage after losing his parents in a car accident. Since then, the guitar had remained untouched and inspiration silent. He had a random job at an office, paid the bills, and that was it. No one waited for him, no friends, no family. Just him and that moldy, silent apartment, stuck in a time that no longer mattered. That morning, after finishing his coffee, he felt an unusual restlessness, a sudden urge to leave, to walk aimlessly. He looked out the window. The city was slowly waking up under a fine drizzle. He grabbed his coat and, without much thought, decided to follow the impulse. The streets seemed emptier than usual. Elias wandered through neighborhoods he barely knew, dodging puddles and observing closed shop fronts. That's when something caught his attention on a forgotten corner, a small antique shop with a peeling facade and a dusty window. Relics of Time read the crooked sign. He couldn't explain why, but he felt drawn. He pushed the door open, which creaked almost theatrically. Inside, the smell of old paper and wet wood was strong. Objects of all kinds piled up on shelves, clocks, paintings, old dolls, yellowed books. And in a dark corner, leaning against a piece of furniture, there was a guitar. It was old but well preserved, with new strings and a discreet shine on the darkened varnish. "Interested?" said a hoarse voice behind the counter. Elias turned and saw an old man with deep eyes and trembling hands watching him. "Maybe." He replied. "How much is it?" The old man smiled enigmatically. "For you? You can take it. This guitar has been waiting a long time for someone who truly plays." Elias hesitated. He wasn't the type to accept favors, but something about the situation felt right, as if it were meant to be. He thanked with a nod and left with the guitar under his arm, feeling a strange satisfaction. Back home, he carefully cleaned the instrument. The sound of the strings resonated clean, strong, as if the guitar had been waiting years for that moment. Then he noticed a hidden compartment in the case. He opened it carefully and found, folded, an old handwritten music sheet with notes that seemed to dance on the yellowed paper. Asterisk, asterisk, Song of Loss, asterisk, asterisk. It read at the top, in elegant letters. Holding the paper, Elias felt a shiver down his spine. Something in that melody called to him, but at the same time, it seemed to whisper a warning. He decided to set it aside, at least for now. He placed the guitar in the corner of the room and sat in the armchair, looking at the rain, now falling harder. That night, the silence seemed heavier. Elias couldn't sleep well, and the clock hands seemed to drag. He felt accompanied, but didn't know by whom or why. The music sheet was still on the table, waiting. The sound of the wind hitting the windows woke Elias, but he no longer knew if he had actually slept. His eyes burned, and the morning light bothered him as if he had been in darkness for days. He got up slowly, feeling his muscles tense, and his eyes soon found the music sheet, still on the table, as if waiting for him. There was something hypnotic about that paper. The notes, although old, seemed to vibrate with life. Elias ran his fingers over the yellowed surface and felt a chill run down his neck. He wondered who had written that music and why. He picked up the guitar, sat in the armchair, and positioned the instrument on his lap. Before playing a note, he sat there in silence for a few minutes, observing the arrangement of the chords. It wasn't a complicated melody, but there was an air of solemnity about it, a weight he couldn't explain. With uncertain fingers, he strummed the first notes. The sound that echoed through the room wasn't what he expected. It wasn't just music. It was something deeper, more intimate. It was as if the guitar spoke, as if each note brought with it a forgotten piece of emotion. Elias stopped. He took a deep breath. He played again from the beginning, more firmly. The melody was beautiful, but filled with an inexplicable sadness. Each chord seemed to invade his mind, unearthing memories and feelings he had buried years ago. He couldn't stop. He played until the end, eyes brimming, heart racing. When he finished, the silence was absolute. Elias let the guitar rest on the floor and leaned back in the armchair, trying to understand what he felt. It was as if he had lost something, or someone. And then, he heard it, a faint sound, almost imperceptible. A child's laughter coming from the hallway. Elias turned his head quickly, but there was no one. He got up slowly and walked to the hallway door. He looked around. Silence. Must be the fatigue, he muttered to himself. He returned to the living room, but something was different. The clock, stopped for months, was now working. The ticking was constant, firm. He felt a slight tremor in his hands. He decided to put away the guitar and the music sheet. Maybe it was better to rest, to forget that music for a while. But it was too late. The day dragged on, and Elias barely noticed time passing. He couldn't focus on anything. He tried reading an old book, listening to the radio, even turned on the TV, but everything felt distant, colorless, lifeless. The only thing pulsing in his mind was the melody. In the late afternoon, the golden light of the sun flooded the room, creating warm reflections on the wooden floor. Elias stood up, almost in a trance, and picked up the guitar again. He sat down, positioned his fingers on the strings, and without hesitation began to play. This time, the music flowed more naturally. Each note seemed to know where to go, and Elias's fingers glided as if they had memorized the score years ago. The room, once silent, now seemed to vibrate. The sound echoed through the walls, windows, and floor. As he played, he felt something change around him. The smell of the room transformed, the air grew thicker, filled with a sweet, familiar scent. And then, in the middle of the music, he heard the child's laughter again, but this time closer, more vivid. He stopped playing, eyes wide open. The bedroom door was ajar, and for a moment, he swore he saw a small shadow cross the hallway. Slowly, he stood up, guitar still in hand, and walked over. The room was empty, as always, but there was something new, a toy, a wooden car, resting in the corner, covered in dust. Elias had never owned that object. He sat on the bed, confused. He picked up the toy and examined it. A knot formed in his throat. Memories of the previous night's dream came rushing back. The children's touch, the woman's smile, the sound of happiness he hadn't heard in years. Was it just a delusion? He returned to the living room. He needed answers. He grabbed the score and examined it again. There was something written at the bottom, almost illegible. Asterisk, asterisk, to remember what was forgotten, asterisk, asterisk. Forgotten? He whispered to himself. He stood up abruptly and began searching the house. He rummaged through drawers, shelves, old boxes, looking for any clue, anything that could explain what was happening. He found old photo albums, letters from his parents, old bills, but nothing else. And then, in a forgotten drawer of the desk, he found something different, a letter, addressed to him, undated. The handwriting was elegant, firm. Asterisk, asterisk, Elias. I know one day you'll find this music. I hope when that happens, your heart will be ready. The song holds memories that are not yours, but could be. Choices not made, lives not lived. Listen carefully, and perhaps you'll find what you've always searched for. Asterisk, asterisk, there was no signature. The letter seemed written for him, by him, but how could that be? Confused, he sat again. Night was falling, and darkness enveloped the room. He lit a dim lamp and stared at the guitar. He needed to play again. He positioned himself, took a deep breath, and began. This time, the music felt different, more intense, fuller. As he played, the walls of the room began to distort. Shadows took shape, and he felt as if he were somewhere else. He saw, through the notes, scenes passing through his mind. Himself younger, in love, marrying the woman from the dream. He saw the birth of the children, birthdays, laughter, cries, a whole life condensed into minutes. When he finished, tears streamed down his face. That wasn't imagination. He had lived that. Somehow, or could have. The next morning, Elias woke up with a strange feeling. The apartment, though the same, seemed charged with a new energy. Everything was in place, but the objects seemed more alive. The armchair, the guitar, even the clock, ticking with an unsettling precision. He drank his coffee in silence, staring at the score. Each time he looked at it, something inside him broke, and at the same time, completed itself. The music wasn't just sound, it was a bridge to a life he desired, but never thought he could feel so real. He decided to go out. He needed to breathe different air, see other people. He walked the streets aimlessly, his steps automatic, his eyes lost. The people around him seemed distant, like shadows. The only thing that made sense was the melody, repeating in his mind. He entered an old bookstore, one of those he used to frequent years ago. The smell of paper and wood calmed him a bit. He leafed through some books, but his eyes stopped on a title. Lives We Didn't Live. He picked up the book, curious, and opened it randomly. The passage read, there are paths we cross in dreams, lives that could have been ours and sometimes visit us when we least expect. Some melodies guide us to them. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. Too much of a coincidence. He paid for the book and returned home. Upon arriving, he found the room slightly different. The wooden car was now clean, like new, and on the table, a photograph. He didn't remember seeing it before. It was him embracing the woman from the dream, smiling in front of a house he didn't recognize. He touched the photo with trembling fingers. Reality was beginning to blend. He no longer knew where delusion ended and truth began. He picked up the book, sat down, and continued reading. He discovered that the melody he had found was part of a rare collection, composed by musicians seeking to capture the essence of alternate lives. Some called it art, others madness. Elias knew what he needed to do. He would play the music once more with an open heart, ready to dive deeper into the echoes of the past. Elias played. He played as if it were the last thing he would ever do. With each chord, he felt closer to something he couldn't name. The room vanished, and he sank deeper and deeper into that life. That wasn't his, but somehow seemed to be. The visions now were clearer, more vivid. They weren't flashes, they were complete memories. He was sitting at the dinner table, the woman served soup, the children laughed, and he told stories of his youth as a musician. The smell of food, the warmth of the room, everything was too real to be just illusion. When he finished playing, he stood up slowly. The room was different. The walls, once bare, now had framed family pictures. The rug was new, lighter, cleaner. The curtains had delicate embroidery. Reality had changed. Elias walked to the mirror and looked at himself. It wasn't just him. It was the other Elias the one who had followed the path he didn't take. A fulfilled man, loved, who had known how to choose. A man who, in some way, existed within him. He sat down, confused. Who was he really? The lonely man in the apartment, or the loving father in the full house in the days that followed? Elias barely left home. The music had become an addiction. He played and saw the other life take shape. With each new execution, the house changed more, as if the worlds were merging. People in the building began to notice. A neighbor knocked on his door, worried about Elias's disappearance. He didn't answer. He was afraid that if he opened the door, everything would collapse. That new world was all he had ever wanted. But there was a price. Elias began to forget. Small things at first, where he kept his keys, the name of a co-worker, the taste of coffee. Then, he forgot where his old guitar was, or even his mother's name. The real life was fading. That night, he woke up to the sound of footsteps. He got up and saw in the mirror the woman and the children. They smiled, but there was something in their eyes, a plea. They wanted him to stay forever. The neighbor insisted. He knocked again, this time harder. Elias, disturbed, opened the door. He was pale, eyes sunken, unshaven. "Elias, are you okay?" asked the man. "I'm where I always wanted to be," he replied with an empty smile. The neighbor looked at the room and noticed the changes. Photos he had never seen, new objects, a strange smell in the air. None of this was here before. I found myself, finally. The music showed me. The neighbor tried to convince him to leave to get help, but Elias closed the door. He sat and cried from fear, confusion, love. He no longer knew what was real. That night, the music played by itself. He heard the notes echoing through the walls. He no longer needed the guitar. The song was inside him. In the morning, a letter was left under his door. It was from the neighbor. Inside, there was an old newspaper clipping, yellowed. Asterisk, asterisk, musician disappears after creating a work about parallel lives, asterisk, asterisk. Elias read every line carefully. The composer was a man who, according to reports, plunged into madness after creating a melody based on dreams of a life he never had. Some said he lived in another world now, others that he was never found. Elias felt a chill. It was as if that story were his. Or would he be the next to disappear? He went to the window. The city was out there, indifferent, real. But his heart beat for another place. He picked up the score and looked at it. Asterisk, asterisk, to remember what was forgotten, asterisk, asterisk. The music was a choice. Elias knew he couldn't go on like that. He had to decide. Either forget the music, burn the score and return to his empty life, or accept the illusion and fully immerse in that new world. He sat one last time with the guitar. His fingers trembled. He began to play, and as he did, the walls of the room disappeared. He was in the dream house. The children ran to him. The woman embraced him. But something changed. The sound faltered and he saw his reflection in a mirror. Alone, aged, lost. The song wavered. He had to choose. He dropped the guitar, stood up and shouted, "I don't know what's real." The woman approached, caressed his face. "Here is where you belong." Elias closed his eyes. He felt the warmth of the embrace, the touch of the children's small hands. And then he decided. He returned to the guitar, played the final notes. Days later, the neighbor called the police. No one had seen Elias for days. They broke down the door. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no photos, no guitar. Only the score on the floor, torn in half. The clock stopped. The air, cold. On the wall, a single mark, the silhouette of a family, drawn by time, by silence, by absence. Elias was never seen again, but sometimes, passing through the hallway, the neighbor swears he hears a melody, soft, sad, eternal.